Hello. Hope your week is going good. It is the summer season. Are you taking time to enjoy the sun and the extended daylight times, or are you sick of the heat and enjoying indoors and air condition? I would love to know. Today's topic is all about boundaries and sharing. So there are going to be two perspectives that come out of this chat, and you can categorize yourself as you wish. I feel like it's a really good topic to shine light on because we grow up in schools being communicated certain ways or in homes to a degree, but then there are different styles of upbringing where communication and messages is constructed in a way that is suitable for each household and maybe even different socioeconomic levels of communication patterns and having specific boundaries. And you might hear me talk about this more and more at My Green Balance because in this day and age, especially after the pandemic, many families really took time to refine their structures within their homes, their communications priorities after going through such a traumatic global experience where we had to shift our lives, do more stuff online, can't leave the house at certain hours. And it really got a lot of people to decide, well, even after this pandemic, there's certain restrictions that I am going to keep instilled. For example, social distancing. We might grow up in a society where if you go to restaurants or clubs, people might come over to your table if you're known, or might come over to hug you, or and if you have learned anything from that pandemic, you might have become even more conscious about hygiene and social distancing and keeping your distance because of personal hygiene matters and carrying around your hand sanitizer and air kisses. Mwah, mwah. Let's say somebody approaches you and they're sweaty and smelly from the gym, and you're like, don't approach me, please, with a hug because you smell disgusting. And you don't want to say that, but at the same time, you want to have that don't approach me boundary that I can approach you if I feel I want to, but you don't approach me with that smelly, sweaty side of things and think that that's okay because that is not okay, if that makes sense. And therefore, the conversation around boundaries, to me, I feel is very valuable and important. People might think that they don't want to respect boundaries because they think that they can tell a person whatever they want to their face that's disrespectful. And we all know that in this day and age, especially with political uh, incorrectedness or correctedness. There's some things we don't say to people. We definitely don't show up to insult people to their face. But having a boundary that says, no, you cannot speak to me at this hour, or no, go and take a shower before you approach me with a hug, or please make sure your stuff is tidy and not smelling up the space for specific shared environmental reasons. And this is not rude or selfish, it is human respect and decency because if something is annoying or upsetting a person in an environment, that person can communicate a boundary that says, why don't you keep that behavior over there? But it doesn't cross this wall or this line to be in this environment. And you have to respect that whether you like it or not. So I put together here on my blog and also a little slide deck that I can show you and we can go through that together because whether this is a conversation you have, whether you're a teacher in schools or you're a principal or you're managing a family, communication is everything and you need to have the right tools to say the message the right way without overly emotional responses that come across uh in a different way. And speaking is not rude, and having the ability to communicate and say no is not rude because that is your human dignity of yourself. So it's all about how you say things, but people on the other side of boundaries might not interpret a simple, respectful no, that's not acceptable, as being polite. But the reality is that is polite, and it's just called self-respect. So it's interesting to really review what you consider rude, to the extent of what is considered rude in general. For example, even further, let's say that you are enjoying eating healthy and maybe more plant-based diet, and people want to bring, junk food around and offer you lots of fattening foods. If you say no, that's not rude. That is you having self-respect for your body and for you wanting to stay slim and fit, because you know that your body is what your vehicle is per day that you have to go about with for the rest of your life. And getting the right energy in there is important. So if you say no to junk food, that's not being rude to someone else, that's being polite to yourself. If that person feels rejected or they feel like that's rude, that is their own emotional regulation system that has an issue. And maybe that person is overweight or extra overweight. That's like saying, I'm not going to follow your overweight or extreme overweight behavior, not because I'm rude, but because I'm not going to allow myself to go down that way. I want to keep a lean, flexible, healthy body because that's an important value. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you in terms of information is because you might or might not have been aware that this is a form of self-respect, to have the communication skills to let people know. And let's go on over to see what we got here in this little presentation deck. You can go to my website, www.mygreenbalance.com. But I thought for a change of scene, I would do a presentation deck on this. And I know you're probably all excited watching the World Cup. Who's watching all the World Cup games this year? So much going on, seeing all the players and lots of fun energy around the world. Sport is one of these great things that we are so grateful for. All right, and when you go to my website, you can see the full blog of why healthy boundaries matter more than forced sharing. I'm not a parent, so I can't speak for, what you as a parent train your children to do. But through spending time with parents, I feel like what I've learned is that parents are more leaning in this direction in terms of their disciplinary methods. Correct me if I'm wrong, of what you're seeing in schools and stuff and how you're educating your children. I find it interesting to observe from a sociology perspective. I love people watching. So sometimes I just observe human behavior because I find it fascinating, whether you have a certain outfit together, how you look polished, or what you're doing, and why are you people doing this, and how are people managing children in these situations as well. Because, growing up, we were brought up a certain way, our parents were brought up a certain way, our grandparents were brought up a certain way. And a lot of that changes over time. You'll notice that things that were normal for your parents' upbringing before cell phones are not normal today for the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren. And things evolve. And you can't stay the same with your same principles or disciplinary practices to a degree, but there's some tradition that you do keep. And that goes again in terms of socioeconomic class and how things evolve. what stays and what evolves based on trial and error, seeing what worked, what didn't work. A lot of people look to their parents to say, well, my parents did X, Y, and Z, so I'm not going to raise my children like that. I'm going to do A, B, and C. And a lot of people look at what their parents did and said, I love what my parents did, so I'm going to continue to do that with my offspring. So it's all very interesting thoughts and conversations, because the worst thing you ever want to come up to do is get in an argument with your spouse or your loved one because you were brought up one way and they were brought up another way, or seeing your kids go through this in school and then you wonder, well, how would we deal with this? Are we going to deal with it like that or like this? And so I'm going to just bring my perspective of what I think. And whether you think that's right or wrong, this is not advice. This is a conversation, and you get to make your own decisions. Okay? Because what I love about life is there are only certain things that are actually in our control. And when it comes to health and wellness, what we want to always observe is that we want to focus on what we can control. There are things that each human can control, like your diet, going to the grocery, prepping your meals, your personal routines, your hygiene, your meal prep, your spending. But then on a larger global scale, or if you have a boss or you work for different people, there are things you can't control because you are not your own boss, or you don't have XYZ privileges, or you don't have the opportunities to do X, Y, and Z. So when you get to focus on what you can control, what is in your physical reality that you can control, you stick to that, because you can't be upset about the things you cannot control, but you can be content and master the things within your control. For example, your mindset, your hobbies, your creative side of things, your lifestyle, your health, your fitness. These are all concepts in your control, but there's certain rules and regulations globally that are not in your control. And it's very important to observe and understand and identify the difference, because a lot of people try to push boundaries with the law and the global systems and with authorities. And the reality is, no, you don't push those boundaries. You don't push rudeness. You don't push into people's lives. You don't invade people's privacy, because that's rude. Invasion of a person's privacy is by far the most disrespectful thing, and the most disrespectful thing to cross people's boundaries, like a criminal invading somebody's home or space and then having the audacity to comment or write reports on those criminal behaviors. All right, so I took this blog, Healthy Boundaries Matter More Than Forced Sharing, and I totally agree with this for the development of human evolution. And there's a difference between generosity, entitlement, and respect. And I have this in full writing here, but I did put together a little deck that we'll go through. So you can decide if you want to follow up to go to MyGreenBalance website to review our stuff there with the full read, but I'm going to condense this chat with you over this deck. But before we get there, I want you to just have a look. I recently ordered some cute outfits from this site. And I know it's summertime, you might not be thinking about this right now, but just remember, winter always is coming. And this is something you can get in the summer or before the next season, just to have a little stash for the cozy season coming ahead. I really love this one that I got. This butter yellow, and it's so cozy and comfy, so I'm excited about that. All right, and without further ado, let's see what we got here. Why healthy boundaries matter than forced sharing. The difference between generosity and being entitled, and then what is respect. Okay. A modern perspective on generosity, ownership, agency, and respectful community behavior. If you're interested in having this chat, stick around. If not, toodaloo. Okay, so the core insight is that generosity is valuable, and so is respecting ownership. So we like generosity when you are giving from overflow and you are considering other people and you do charities and you show up and there's lots of extra to give. When generosity becomes unappreciated or disrespected or entitled, someone feels entitled to your generosity, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's when we put our foot down and say, no, you do not have the entitlement to have that audacity to feel entitled to someone's generosity, whether that is generosity of time, finance, resources, energy, or even someone's presence. Nobody has to acknowledge you if they don't want to. It is that simple. We are all autonomous people in this universe. A polite smile, sure, but you don't have to communicate with people you do not wish to communicate with. That is a fact. So you don't force people to communicate with people they're uncomfortable with, the same way you raise a child. And if a child does not want to go and hug every single new person at an adult event, you don't force that child to do that. You say to the child, you say hello polite as possible, but you don't have to go and hug everybody. No. And you teach them respect and respectful communication, but you value that boundary that a child has the right to say no to that form of communication. Healthy sharing is when we choose to give. When sharing is forced, children learn that their boundaries matter less than making someone else happy. And making someone else happy is not the priority when it comes to a boundary being crossed. Because what happens when a boundary is crossed, the person whose boundary is crossed usually is not going to be happy. So that's like training your child to say, you're going to be upset and unhappy because I'm crossing your boundaries or poking at you because it's going to make my guest happy. And you're here to have all of your boundaries not considered so that whoever's here is more important than you. Personally, I would not want to raise my children like that. And again, this is an interesting conversation because if your child genuinely enjoys that conversation and wants to be in the room and wants to go and hug and say, hi, auntie, hi, uncle, I'm so happy to see you, chat, 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 and it's a natural flow, you can tell the difference of how that flow works versus a forced interaction. Let's say also new toys, right? Healthy sharing is voluntary. You might have your new toys, your new Barbie sets or your new games and whatnot. And you can choose if you want to call someone over and say, hey, I just got this new game. I want someone to play with me. Or I just got these new toys. Come over and play with me. I'm going to put some for you and put some for me. And we could play in a mutually organized setting. That's different for if guests show up to your house when you have a new toy set and demand or have the feeling of entitlement that because you got a new toy set, they can go into your room, pick up your new toys, and play with them anyhow. And whether you say yes or no, whether anything gets mashed up or destroyed, it's not it's not this person's disposition. That is a complete boundary cross based on the notion of no, we share. So if you got something new, you have to share. And the reality is no, you don't have to share. Especially if you know the people coming over in scenario two have no real respect or ability to take care of things and destroy toys, and also don't buy back a destructive toy. Let's say that they trash the toy and they don't replace it with a new one. Even so, those are important, and you learn boundaries as you evolve as to who respects your things and who does not. And after a certain number of experiences, you have a clear understanding and track record of who demonstrates respect for your new toys, your new items, and your things, and who clearly demonstrates disrespect time and time again. These are not observations you can ignore. These are literal events that you can look at in a repeated way. So if that conversation needs to be had, whether it causes upset or emotions from that, when you put your foot down approach, you have to understand the communication to say, look, this is what entitlement looks like. You are not entitled to other people's toys. You stick with your own stuff. And if you call your friend over to enjoy your company, it's one thing, but nobody from an authority perspective is allowed to call people over to use your stuff, in my perspective, right? And you learn these things early on as you evolve so that you have a clear understanding of what you're willing to share or not share, and that it's okay for you to say no. And you'll see so many kids having tantrums about this all the time. So it's clearly something needs to be um, observed there. That they say, well, kids are kids. But at the same time, the parents have the notion to say, if you're coming over to our house, then you bring your own toys or whatnot. The kids get to decide. And ownership and generosity can coexist in that way that I just described. And boundaries protect agency. Your boundaries, right? So the confusing messages that you want to avoid letting your children know, whether you're aware of this or not, is that other people's happiness matters more than their boundaries. And that is something you want to make sure is not how they grow up, because in the real world, they might become a pushover and give too much to people who just take and destroy and take and destroy at the expense of their own toy sets that they work hard to accumulate. And you see this with, adults too, as people grow and evolve and have assets. You might notice some people know how to care for assets, and some people turn assets into liabilities because they don't understand how to upkeep, for example, real estate, or having the right property managers, or keeping conditions up to a certain standard. And these are important boundaries to have standards in these communications, where it's extremely important that any shared real estate or real estate portfolio within families, toys as we get older go into assets and liabilities, and boats and cars and planes and houses and land and X, Y, and Z businesses and shares and whatnot. These communications that are learned here evolve with us over time. And you'll notice through different levels that either there's stuff to tweak along the way, or if you've done everything that you feel is perfect and correct, culo brizo, and good for you. And that's an example that you can say our family has extremely great boundaries and we feel good about how we do things. And nobody is entitled to call us selfish because we have the right boundaries in place. I notice a lot when learning about finance, health, and wealth that in life there's some people in a mindset even that have this mindset of anybody who's doing well in life or being successful or buying new cars or new houses, you'll hear the conversation from the lower socioeconomic class levels that they always have a criticism to say to the higher levels of success. And it always is a criticism like, well, do you know how they bought that car? Do you know how they got their money? And it just was, it's always some negative connotation that they have to say. And well, being rich is not going to make you happy and like they always have this like dialogue going on about how bad it is to be successful or wealthy, and it's constant. And it's so annoying because people all in this world have the ability to take action and do better for themselves, but some people refuse to want to evolve or have healthy boundaries and have these difficult conversations and end up in this loop of being in a rut and being negative and criticizing other people who are doing well instead of positioning the switch of mindset to learn. You can acknowledge, wow, this is the flip side of that, right? So on the other side, it's, oh my gosh, you are so successful. I love what you're doing with this new venture and this project, and it's working. Can you give me some insight? Do you have any advice for me that I can do better? Do you have any notion on, X, Y, and Z questions? How did you get this land? Or do you have work for me? Or is there a position available that we can go to lunch sometime or have a coffee? There's just two mindsets existing at the same time. And I'm not sure if that previous one is just the mindset of, I don't know if it's pride or poverty or spirit of poverty or something in the lower socioeconomic classes. But you'll notice even some millionaires still have that mindset where they're stuck there and they can't advance to the next levels because they refuse to do the emotional, psychological work to consider, okay, well, if I've done some millions, can I make that times 10 or times 20 or times 30 and keep growing? And can I position myself in the right rooms to learn and be around what's growing and moving versus what's dying and constantly in funerals? Okay, so we got a little bit of a power cut there. So it'll be exciting to feel like this is still going. But yeah, so that's the flip side of what that is. And to me, I feel like I'm not going to share when it comes to people telling me or forcing me to share things at my own expense. Let's say I sacrificed a lot to learn certain things that people didn't want to sacrifice. And they didn't want to spend the time learning, or they didn't want to spend the time acknowledging a better future, except they wanted to hate on it. Like, that's just the worst position because if you are constantly hating, 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 that energy is just not going to take you to the next level. And the next level is when it's like, well, what's good about this? And what's the next level? And how can we work together instead of having secret competitions behind a person's back and trying to tear people down and steal their toys and steal their progress and throw shade on their light and throw shade on their growth? Let's say, for example, you are raising star athletes and they go to competitions and they win trophies, and their friends come over and want to look at their trophies. You can't expect that your child is going to be like, yeah, share my trophies. No, you won those trophies fair and square. They're your trophies. You don't share those things. Like, they're just certain things that you don't have to share with, let's say you come from a large family and your people above you would say, well, you come from a large family, so you have to share your wealth with them or your food with them or you have to share to evolve. Well, no, because that could deplete you significantly and slow you down from moving forward in your life. And a lot of families do have these boundaries in place where there are strict rules of no, you're separate, you're separate, you're separate, you're separate. We don't cross on those levels. We don't cross in those business rules. And the reason why is because that is being demonstrated to not be successful. So at a person's expense, there is no room to expect a person to share at their depletion levels, and there's some perspectives of being a philosophical perspective of, put others first and give more into the community and, love others as you love yourself. At the same time, if you don't love yourself, how do you expect to love others as you love yourself? Like, let's say you don't love yourself and you're putting that energy to others, putting other people first. You're putting negative energy to other people because you're not loving yourself first of all. And that's a boundary because you have to put yourself first because you cannot pour from an empty cup in the first place. And no human should be put in positions to have to keep pouring at the expense of not having anything in the refilling perspective. So that's a boundary, and it's not rude to communicate, no, that's not happening. I'm not giving, I'm not pouring, I'm not rude, I'm just not doing it. If you don't have children, some people think, well, not having children is selfish. Well, God might have put me in this situation to be not having children, but that does not mean that I'm going to give my time, space, and energy to other people's children when I would rather work, do my job, travel, enjoy my youth. That's a boundary. It's not rude and it's not selfish. That is the trajectory of a human's life. I don't want to put myself in this position, but I'm just saying there are other single professionals in the world who live a youthful life who don't have expectations to give to people that are not their immediate family. First of all, so I wouldn't put that expectation onto anybody, and I would never make someone feel guilty for that notion either. And so that is the difference between healthy sharing and forced sharing. So let's say healthy sharing is voluntary, it's joyful, empathetic, respectful, it builds confidence. Let's say you do get paid and there's someone you want to catch up with specifically that you enjoy a conversation with and you enjoy hanging out. So you will say, when I spend time with this person, I feel energized and motivated and on track. So I can go and share with this person because it brings value to me. I'll call them up, say you want to grab a coffee, bills on me, XYZ. Or lunch or dinner or trip or whatever. Cool. That is something that makes you happy. But on the flip side, force sharing is like pressure based. It has guilt there. It's negotiable on ownership. It weakens a person's voice and it definitely creates resentment because nobody wants to feel forced to do anything in this life. There's some normal expectations of societal expectations, like you take a shower, you have good hygiene, you dress well, you're polite. You're not forced to show up in that way. Those are normal societal expectations. But sharing, buying gifts for people just for buying gifts instead of saving or investing, that is pressure based and also that is not financially responsible, right? When you come from big families and communities, there's no forced sharing rules that should ever be promoted or prioritized over a healthy sharing energy flow. I hope you can see the difference here and you can understand where there is flow of this makes me feel good to create something, so I want to buy you a nice gift versus this event is coming up. You have to buy a gift and you have to buy a gift for this person and whatnot, not. Oh, you didn't call this person and you had extra time on a weekend? Shame on you. No, not shame on you. You know what you did? Instead, you went to the gym. You slept, you rested, and you went to Pilates. Shame on you that you didn't work out. Do you see the difference? Being selfish with time is not being selfish. That is human survival and thriving. You need to have strict boundaries with your calendar and your schedule. That is called a healthy routine. Everyone should get one. True generosity grows from freedom and not resentment. And boundaries do matter because agency is the ability to make decisions about your possessions, your time, your energy, and your relationships. This is the pillars of confidence, leadership, negotiation, and emotional health. Children who learn that respectful boundaries are acceptable often grow into adults who communicate clearly, recognize unhealthy pressure, and feel a lot less guilt when protecting what they have built. Effort does increase value. People often care for what they build and they care for how they spend their money. Every dollar you spend is an emotional dollar. People spend where they care. People value what they build. If you build a house, you will love that house. You will have all the maintenance of that house. If you build a healthy body, you will love a healthy body. If you build a healthy family, you will enjoy having a healthy family. This balance of respect and thriving is the key for managing time, discipline, choosing what sacrifices you want to make, not a sacrifice that someone thinks you should make. And that is the difference too with boundaries, is that there are societal expectations from, it depends how close or far these connections are to you as a person. And nobody gets to tell you what you should be sacrificing. You choose to sacrifice what's important to you, that is specific for you to get from A to B for whatever outcome you're going for. If you think sacrificing late nights and partying and frivolous spending and a social life to a degree for a certain amount of time is a good sacrifice for you to build discipline, routine, habit, and repetition, that's for you to decide. But a person that tells you how to sacrifice in your free time is a boundary that's a hard no. You focus on your sacrifices and what, if you want to sacrifice yourself and how you want to sacrifice stuff in your life, that I don't have to do that because I've already chosen what I'm willing to sacrifice in my life and what I'm not willing to sacrifice in my life. And that's just a hard no. You don't get to pass. You don't get to pass judgment on that. And you don't get to have a comment to tell me what you think that I should sacrifice. And similarly, I'm not going to tell you what you think, what I think you should sacrifice. Unless you're paying me as a coach and you say, Annie, I actually want to lose weight. I might have to make a few sacrifices. If you come to me with money and you want to pay me to tell you what to sacrifice to get slim, sure, I'll do that. But if I'm not paying you and you're just talking to me and I don't agree with your lifestyle and I don't want to be like you and I don't want to live like you and I don't have you as my future goals or outcomes or who I want to be in this life, you best believe I'm going to tell you, no, don't talk to me. And that's a boundary. And I'm not being rude, but no, right? And so sustained effort, increased perceived value, and when access is expected without responsibility, appreciation often declines. Because expectations ruin everything, especially when there's no responsibility attached to that. And therefore, entitlement can be replaced with gratitude. So entitlement is not the emotion or the form of version of a person we wish to attract or have in our space, because we like grateful people who can appreciate hard work and appreciate gifts and who can appreciate what has been given and what has been done for a person, and to acknowledge the sacrifices people make in that degree. If a person just feels entitled and they can't appreciate or show respect and they belittle someone's efforts after giving a lot, that reflects really badly on them as a person. But everybody raises their families different, and you'll see these types of people in the world, the 8 billion people, different family styles, different child raising styles, and whatnot, and different tolerances for what is acceptable and what's not acceptable for Nepo babies and so forth. Okay, so what adults build and protect: businesses, books, inventions, intellectual property, savings, homes, careers. And healthy societies encourage collaboration while protecting ownership. So the conferences I've been to, they say, competition is happening at the lowest levels of human intelligence and evolution because, and you're at the top, collaboration, and you're paid with your collaboration. It's not just collaborating for free. It's all investing and making more money. That's the point of collaboration, is what's happening at the top. So I've never really been into this whole competition thing because I feel like it's below what I care to do when I can see a larger goal of, well, if we work together, invested this amount over 4 years, this project can scale 10 times bigger than your pea-sized brain can even conceptualize at the level you want to compete with me at. Like, I don't see it like that because I see it 10x what you see in the first place. So do I want to compete with that? No, I don't. Really don't. Final takeaway is saying I'd rather not share this today. It's not selfish, it's agency. And it's a full sentence. Ownership and generosity depend on one another. True generosity grows from freedom, not guilt, not resentment. Protect what you have spent years building. Healthy boundaries do not weaken generosity, they give it meaning. Be generous by choice. Protect what matters with self-respect. Yeah, so this is a new style that I quite like. So I'm definitely gonna enjoy that. Long chat today. I'm planning to evolve this podcast so we go deep with different emotions and communications. We also have our executive series where we really give some food to the brain and the mind and speak on all these tech terms for fun to spark your intellectual capacity and growth. Stick around and grow with us here at MyGreenBalance so that you can evolve with better communication skills, better emotional intelligence, better physique, fitness, training, habits, routines, and overall life fulfillment, because what you put off today is only going to increase in the outcome of procrastination impact tomorrow, in which procrastinating to the degree of never getting stuff done is the hardest pill of regret that you're going to wish you focused on earlier on in your life. For example, if you're hoarding and you have excess accumulation of junk everywhere in your life, in your house, in your storage, in your car, at your work. It's just extra clutter in your bank accounts. You have messy accounts, you have messy finance, and everything's a mess, and you haven't looked at it in 20 years. You might want to have a look and clean stuff up. Or maybe you put off communicating with your loved ones, or you put forward plans that say to everyone, hey, I have a routine in order that if we have a year calendar where every quarter or once a month we're meeting to communicate, it's going to save everybody a lot of time, effort, confusion, and emotional damage in the future. But if not, don't take my thought or process or system or advice and deal with your own stuff. But don't be upset when the person who has boundaries says, no, I'm not available because you didn't want to plan things and have the right timing, and you expect to have access to a person's time when they decided to fill up their calendar with things that actually matter to them because you rejected the idea that them having a process or schedule or routine was anything you were interested in at the time to maintain communications and connection. So, with that being said, what we notice is that in high performers, athletes, they have an on season and off season. CEOs have a very booked schedule. Every executive, sales associates are booked from morning to night, back to back. I've seen the top performers' calendars. I've worked on my own calendar. If you don't schedule family time or put meaningful stuff into your schedule, they never happen, and you let go of a lot of great relationships that could have brought real good value to your life. But if you can't even appreciate a person's generosity, and you have the notion to have a disrespectful approach to a person's organizational skills or discipline, that doesn't look bad on the person who has a disciplined life and routine. And it's not rude when they say no to last minute plans because you refuse to accept an upgraded means of communication that has been proven to be successful at the top levels. So you can try and be open, or you can shut down better ways of doing things and stay the same. But at the end of the day, that's like sharing your toys or not sharing your toys. If you don't see that as generosity of time and intelligence and space, okay. If you can appreciate what that does, great. And further, when it comes to a person's schedule, the point of discipline, and any Olympian probably, you can interview Olympian athletes and they'll probably have a similar mindset to everything I'm saying now. I'm not speaking on new things that don't exist. Like, this is real stuff, that people actually live like this. The whole point is to make time for what's important, including your results and your success. If you don't see it like that, there is nothing you can do to tell somebody that this is what it is if they refuse to want to see it as this is what it is. Okay? And I also recommend you schedule time for yourself in that, because you also need to be doing your own treatment. Let's say your body needs massages, you need to be scheduling time for you to go in the gym. All of these things are important because that's your you time we put in the schedule. Then you could decide how you want to share other bits of your time if you want to. And then you also have your work schedule. And then you also have your family schedule and your relationship schedule. So you'll hear me talk a lot about scheduling. And the whole point is we have discipline. mindsets of this is what it is 90% of the time, but there might be a 10% flexibility rate depending on the weather or something random, you know? Like if it's a complete surprise, it might be a gap where there's time, and then there's like, wow, I actually have time, I'll fit into that. But if not, it's just a hard no, hard pass. Okay, cool. So that's on sharing and not sharing, and that is okay, in my opinion, to not share in 2026, especially if it comes at the cost of your own peace of mind. All right, until next time, I'm Annick, and this has been a great chat. Let me know what you think about the presentation style. Should I do it again or just read from the blog? That is to be determined. Okay.